A story of love, betrayal, and redemption unfolds as John and Shannon navigate the highs of marriage and the heartbreak of impossible choices. When Shannon sacrifices their future for her sister's life, their bond shatters, leading to a journey of loss, forgiveness, and a lasting legacy of hope.
Sometimes life feels incredibly perfect, making you question if it's one of those too good to be true situations. Stories like the flawless marriage ruined by a cheating partner, couples broken by a family member's death, or marriages falling apart after losing a child are common. You hear about these tragedies, but you never expect them to happen to you. I'm here to tell you that such possibilities are more real than they might appear. My life was fantastic. I was married to the most beautiful, wonderful, kind, and caring woman I had ever known. I had an excellent job in a field I considered a hobby, and we had just built our dream home on a semi-rural property outside the city. I clearly remember thinking when we moved into the house that everything seemed almost too perfect. Maybe that was the universe sending me a warning. John, your life is too good. You shouldn't be this happy while so much of the population lives in poverty and misery. Oh, right. I haven't properly introduced myself. Please excuse me. My name is John Smith. Sounds pretty common, doesn't it? I'm okay with that. I'm a sports enthusiast. I live and breathe sports, so much so that it's my career. No, I'm not an athlete, although I stay in good shape. I'm a sports analyst. I host my own podcast, have recently appeared on some small sports programs, and work for a major fantasy sports website as the statistics expert. I handle numbers and projections, offering tips, insights, and various analyses. It's quite involved, it's my passion, and I get paid to do it. I was just as lucky in love. I met Shannon in my final year of community college. We met completely by chance, and if it weren't for that random encounter, I doubt we would have ever found each other. One rare weekend, I decided to go mini-golfing with some friends, a hobby I didn't usually partake in. Shannon was working there as a summer job. She looked so out of place that I almost laughed. She was stunning, not the type of girl you'd expect to see working a kiosk at a small mini-golf place. I never thought I could attract someone as beautiful as her, so any usual nervousness around women disappeared when it came to Shannon. I playfully flirted with her while paying for my round and then went back to my friends. When I was returning my equipment and about to leave, I felt her hand on mine. Looking back, I saw she had slipped a small piece of paper into my hand and gave me a shy smile. I clenched my fist, held her gaze for a moment, and walked out the door feeling on top of the world. When a girl like her shows interest in you, it's a huge boost to your ego. Of course, the paper she gave me had her phone number scribbled on it. I'd love to share the stories of our first date and the romance that followed. But unfortunately, that's not why I'm here. Trust me, it felt like a dream. We quickly fell in love, and within a year, I had decided to propose marriage to her. Our relationship was almost perfect. I say almost, because of course no couple is flawless. Additionally, there was one significant issue between us. Not something I thought would break us apart, but still an issue nonetheless. Her family, specifically, her immediate family. Shannon had 2 loving parents and a younger sister. They were her everything. In all my life, I had never seen a nuclear family so close-knit. So why was this a problem? It's complicated, but to put it simply, I think she loved them too much. That still sounds absurd, doesn't it? How can loving your family excessively be a problem? During the first year of our relationship, I believed I had struck gold. I was with an unbelievably amazing woman whose family loved her deeply and who welcomed me as one of their own. What more could a man ask for when considering a life partner? But once I made the serious commitment, marriage, things changed. The very word seems to shift the normalcy for women. Everything familiar goes out the window and something else takes over, turning their mindset into complete chaos. As soon as she felt secure in our relationship, the true dynamics of her family became clear to me. My mother-in-law was the unquestioned matriarch, directing the family's activities with authority that was never challenged. She was dominant and in control. Although it bothered me to see this, I thought we were distant enough to remain unaffected by her domineering nature. I was wrong. As I mentioned, my life was good. And then, one day, it wasn't. It was an entirely ordinary Friday morning, and I was submerged in magazine articles, juggling 2 televisions, my phone, and 3 laptops. This was typical for me, but if someone unfamiliar walked in, they might think I was obsessed, with sports specifically. To be honest, aside from my wife, sports were my greatest passion. There were moments when she would ask me which I cherished more, her or hockey. Naturally, it was always her, and I believe she was aware of that. Perhaps she just wanted to hear it. I had just taken my last sip of coffee when the phone rang. It was Shannon. "Hey babe, what's going on?" I greeted her, flipping through a magazine as I spoke. "John, put down your magazine. I have something crazy to tell you." Her tone made the magazine slip from my fingers. This wasn't a casual conversation. "Shannon? Are you okay? Is everything all right?" I stammered, my nerves now heightened. I began to rise from the cluttered floor. "Everything's fine, baby," she reassured me, her voice becoming more steady. "I just have something to tell you that I don't think can wait." Okay, I responded, realizing this was serious, but feeling somewhat relieved that she was all right. Shannon sometimes had a tendency to dramatize things, especially over the phone. However, nothing could have prepared me for what she said next. "Well, the thing is—" She paused, seemingly struggling to find the right words. "I'm pregnant." There was silence on both ends of the line. Shannon and I had been trying to conceive for 3 years. In our 6 years of marriage, we had spent half of that time attempting to have a baby, seemingly without success. You're familiar with the routine. A couple tries to conceive, discovers one partner has a problem, undergoes fertility treatments, explores alternatives, and eventually relinquishes the dream. Shannon had fertility issues. I won't delve into the specifics, but the gist was that it was unlikely she would be able to conceive. It was a possibility, just a slim one. These were the circumstances we faced. We hadn't truly given up. We had simply adjusted our mindset. I viewed intimacy as enjoyable, something we both loved, and saw no harm in continuing to have unprotected intimacy with someone you love. We lowered our expectations and moved forward with our lives. Frankly, I never anticipated we would get pregnant. In my mind, although I never voiced it, it was a given. I'm not sure how Shannon truly felt, as we didn't discuss it in depth, but I imagine she was equally stunned by this development. "Are you sure?" I asked awkwardly, struggling to fully grasp what was happening. Shannon's lovely laugh filled my ear, and she gently teased me. "Baby, do you think I'd be telling you this if I wasn't sure?" She was right. Given our history, there was no way she would joke about something like this. We spent the next 20 minutes on the phone, crying, laughing, planning, and expressing our love. It was one of the happiest moments of our entire relationship, and for the first time in nearly 3 years, we dared to dream of the family we so desperately wanted. After Shannon hung up and went back to work, I tried to focus on my own tasks, but I couldn't concentrate. After an hour of no progress, I decided to call it a day and planned to continue later that evening after Shannon and I had time to talk. Shannon returned home earlier than usual that day, and as expected, we embraced, cried, and celebrated together. The entire weekend felt like a dream, something straight out of a romantic movie, I suppose. On Monday morning, we sat side by side in the walk-in clinic, waiting for the results of her pregnancy test. Shannon had taken 5 home pregnancy tests over the weekend, and although it was clear she was pregnant, we needed a doctor's confirmation and to determine how far along she was. The doctor confirmed she was 5 weeks pregnant. I was actually surprised she hadn't realized she was expecting earlier, but to be fair, she had almost no symptoms. What alerted her was how frequently she needed to pee and the slight swelling of her breasts. On a whim, she had picked up a test at work and taken it immediately. We left the clinic beaming, with Shannon holding onto my arm as we crossed the parking lot. We were overjoyed. We had always been happy together, but our dream was to start a large family. Now, we had a glimpse of that dream becoming a reality. I often felt as though the universe had a way of testing me. Just when life seemed to be going well, an unexpected challenge would arise, catching me off guard. For the next 3 weeks, Shannon and I were deeply focused on preparing for the arrival of our baby. We excitedly planned the nursery and shopped for baby essentials, often buying more than we probably needed. One of my favorite purchases was an adorable set of washcloths. It brought me so much joy to be preparing for this new chapter in our lives. But as it often happens, life took an unexpected turn. It wasn't about the baby. Thankfully, that part of our lives remained on track. Shannon's younger sister, Ashley, had been dealing with health issues for a while. It had been a difficult year for her family, as Ashley's kidneys were gradually failing. She was on the transplant list, but her rare blood type made finding a match particularly challenging. The doctors couldn't give an exact timeline, but warned that a transplant would be needed sooner rather than later. We remained hopeful that a donor would be found in time. One afternoon, Shannon called me in a panic. The urgency in her voice immediately told me something was wrong. "John, Ashley's been hospitalized. It's serious," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm on my way to the hospital now. Can you come and be with me, please?" "I'll be there in 20 minutes," I replied, quickly grabbing my things and heading out the door. When I arrived, it became clear how dire the situation was. Ashley's condition had deteriorated rapidly. The doctors had stabilized her for now, but she would likely need to stay in the hospital until a transplant could be arranged. For Shannon, this made everything feel much more real, and it was overwhelming. One evening, as I walked down the hallway toward Ashley's room, I overheard Shannon speaking quietly with her mother in a nearby lounge area. I was about to enter but paused when I heard the word pregnant. Shannon and I hadn't shared the news with her family yet. Since she was considered high risk and we were only 8 weeks along, we decided to wait until later in the pregnancy to tell them. Normally, I wouldn't eavesdrop, but something made me stop and listen. "Oh my goodness!" I heard her mother exclaim. "How far along are you?" "About 8 weeks, Mom," Shannon replied softly. Something felt wrong. Her voice trembled with anxiety and almost sounded sorrowful. This wasn't how we had envisioned announcing our miracle baby to her parents. I was certain Shannon had wanted to make it a grand event with a gender reveal and everything. This situation was strange and made me extremely uneasy. "This is such wonderful news, sweetie. Why do you look so upset?" her mother inquired, clearly sensing Shannon's gloomy demeanor. "Mom," Shannon continued weakly, "I want to donate a kidney to Ashley," she declared, her voice choked with tears. Record scratch. Wait, what? I hadn't heard this before. She had never shown any indication that she wanted to be a donor. My feet almost moved to enter the room, but something held me back for the time being. "Oh, honey, are you serious?" her mom responded, her voice also emotional. "You know your sister would never ask that of you, right?" "Yes, Mom, I understand that, but she doesn't have to," Shannon quickly replied. "I always intended to be her last resort. Secretly, of course," she added. "Oh my God, wait," her mom suddenly exclaimed, as if she had just realized something. "Yes, Mom, I know what this means," Shannon said sadly. And that's when it hit me, like a wave of fear, pain, and panic. She was planning to undergo a kidney transplant. That's major surgery, and a pregnant woman can't have a kidney transplant. "Are you certain you want to do this?" her mom asked pointedly. "I've thought about it all week, and I'm sure," Shannon replied with a mix of sadness and determination. "Have you told John?" "Not yet, Mom," she said. "I honestly don't even know how to tell him." Then go home and tell him sooner rather than later, her mom encouraged. If you're going through with this, you need to start taking care of some things. I will, Mom. Thanks for listening and supporting my decision, Shannon said, embracing her mother tightly and beginning to cry again. I was completely shattered. I backed away from the door and walked down the hall like a zombie. I didn't know where I was headed, but when I got into my SUV, I realized I wasn't going home. I needed to drive and think. As I left the hospital parking lot, I tried to process what I had just heard. My wife planned to terminate our pregnancy and donate a kidney to her sister. She hadn't mentioned any of this to me, and it seemed like she had already made up her mind. I wasn't part of that decision, apparently. I won't lie. It hurt deeply. More than I can ever truly express. So I won't attempt to put it into words. Actually, I will. What hurt the most was that she chose to confide in her mother about her decision instead of me, her husband, her life partner, the father of the baby growing inside her. What did that make me? Less than an acquaintance in my eyes. Did my thoughts and feelings matter so little to Shannon that she would exclude me from making such a significant, life-altering decision, as if I had no right to have a say, at the very least? We had been trying for this baby for nearly 5 years, and when we finally saw our dream coming true, she planned to end it without even consulting me. Tears blurred my vision as I drove, and drove, and drove. I didn't even notice where I was going or check the time. The ringtone of my phone snapped me out of my daze, and when I looked at the dashboard, it was 6 p.m. I had been driving for 4 hours and had no idea where I was. I glanced down at my phone resting on the seat. It was Shannon calling. She was probably home by now, wondering where I was and maybe even where dinner was. But I knew I couldn't face her at this moment. I couldn't bring myself to meet her gaze as she informed me she was ending her pregnancy. I was already falling apart, and she hadn't even spoken to me yet. I decided it was best to answer, just to stop her from calling again and worrying. I would tell her I was at the office and needed to stay late. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the answer button. "Hey, babe, how's everything?" I asked weakly. What could I possibly say to her right now? "John, where are you?" she responded anxiously. "I thought you'd be home. Did something come up at the office?" Yeah. Something happened a couple of hours ago, and I have to stay here much later than expected," I lied. Given the situation, I didn't feel guilty about deceiving Shannon. "Oh," she replied softly, clearly disappointed. "All right. I'll make something for dinner here and then go see Ashley later," she continued. "Should I wait up for you or not?" "Don't wait up," I said, my voice harsher than intended. I think she sensed it, but she didn't mention anything. "Okay, baby. I love you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She was probably thinking about what she wanted to tell me when I got home. I wasn't planning on being there for that conversation tonight. But I knew it was a conversation we would eventually have, and that thought was devastating. "Love you too," I replied before hanging up. I drove for another 4 hours before deciding to head back home. I must have circled the city perimeter a dozen times. With no rush to get home and needing gas, I stopped at a gas station. While pumping gas, I watched a couple leaving the convenience store. They were laughing about something, and he held her hand tightly, showing his affection. As she turned towards me, I noticed she was visibly pregnant, likely 7 or 8 months along. Tears welled up in my eyes as I watched the loving couple interact. I turned away as they passed, trying to hide my face. I felt a deep sense of betrayal. Was it fair to feel this way given the circumstances? It wasn't that I didn't care about Ashley's life. I did, a lot. But I felt I deserved a say in this decision. It seemed like I didn't have any. Was Ashley's life less important than that of our unborn child? It wasn't that straightforward. The fetus in Shannon's WM wasn't just our baby. It symbolized so much more for our future, and she knew that. It devastated me to think she would discard our future like this. It was an almost impossible situation. Losing a family member is an overwhelming tragedy, more painful than one can imagine until it happens. I've lost my mother, all my grandparents, and several aunts and uncles. I understand the pain of losing someone, and I felt like a coward, questioning whether one life was more important than another. But when push came to shove, I realized I valued our unborn child more than almost anyone else on this planet. The only person more important to me was Shannon herself. I started the engine, embarking on the painful drive back home. Would it even feel like home after all this? At 11 p.m., I finally opened the front door. The house was quiet and dark, so I assumed Shannon was already asleep. I didn't want to wake her and force the conversation, so I moved silently through the house, trying my best to remain unnoticed. Shannon was deeply asleep when I slipped into our bed. I could hear her steady breathing. I must have stayed awake for another hour, lying in bed with my mind racing. I even entertained the possibility that I had misheard her and that nothing was going to happen. But reality brought me back, and I knew what I had heard. Eventually, I drifted off to a restless sleep. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and breakfast welcomed me as I woke up the next morning. I glanced at my alarm clock and saw it was 9 a.m., later than usual for me. Shannon was busy in the kitchen, seemingly preparing a lavish meal. The scent of farmer's sausage and eggs filled the air, my favorites. I suspected she was making all my preferred foods to soften me up for her upcoming revelation. My stomach churned at the thought. Preparing myself for the impending conversation, I slipped into a t-shirt and headed towards the kitchen. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Shannon greeted me with a smile. "What time did you get home?" "Morning," I mumbled sleepily. She had farmer's sausage, eggs, bacon, toast, the whole breakfast spread. We usually tried to eat healthily, making such a hearty breakfast a rare treat. It seemed she was setting the stage for the discussion ahead. My appetite had completely vanished. She handed me a cup of coffee while taking a sip of her own. "I got in around 11, I think," I replied absent-mindedly. She continued with some casual conversation about her plans for the day, and I listened, feigning interest. I couldn't help but wonder when she intended to bring up the main topic. After preparing 2 perfect over-easy eggs, she placed them on a plate and presented me with the most appetizing brunch I'd seen in years. It looked truly delicious, but I had no desire to eat. The mere thought of it made me feel nauseous. I knew she wouldn't discuss her plans until I finished eating. Let's just get this over with, I thought, feeling like I was being led to my doom. I quickly devoured her breakfast while she watched with a satisfied smile. Her strategy was working flawlessly. Surely, I couldn't be upset with her after all the effort she put into pleasing me. That was clearly her intention. Deciding to take a shower before she enacted her plan, I stood up to place my plate in the sink. That's when she said the words I had been dreading. "So, baby, there's something we need to talk about, and it's really important," she began, her voice tense with unease. Here it was. I returned to the kitchen island and sat back down on the bar stool. "Sure. What is it?" I responded flatly. "I want to talk about Ashley," she said, her eyes slightly misty at the mention of her sister. I assumed she was trying to elicit my sympathy. I nodded cautiously, encouraging her to go on. She held her coffee mug tightly, as if it were a lifeline. "Ashley's going to die if she doesn't get a new kidney," she stated plainly. That was direct. She began to cry, tears streaming down her cheeks as she opened up to me. "The doctor says she might not live another 2 months," she whispered between sobs. "And I couldn't bear the thought of her dying if there's something I could have done," she added, letting out a deep cry as her head fell and tears continued to flow freely. My heart ached for her sister, and for us. I knew what was coming next, and it pained me to think about hearing it. "I want to give Ashley a kidney," she declared, with a determination and intensity I'd never seen in her before. She had made up her mind, and I wasn't part of that decision. This sparked another wave of her sobbing, and tears began to form in my eyes. I wasn't sure if she wanted a response from me, but I remained silent. I wanted her to express everything, and honestly, I didn't have much to say myself. I was completely speechless. Shannon looked into my eyes, and I could see her soul. Her heart was shattered, and she was deeply conflicted, yet I also saw resolve. I waited. "Aren't you going to say something?" she asked tearfully. I met her sorrowful gaze, probing her eyes for any sign that she might reconsider and abandon her plan. I truly didn't want to be the one to tell her she couldn't go through with it, as that would bring a whole new set of challenges. I realized I couldn't support her choice and knew I needed to express my feelings, but I hesitated to say no before she had fully shared her thoughts. She gauged my silence for a few moments before continuing. "I've thought about this a lot, and I need to proceed," she declared, desperately looking to me for some sign that I understood her struggle. Somehow, I found my voice. "So, it's decided then?" I asked, my tone unexpectedly calm and emotionless. I felt myself emotionally shutting down as time passed. "We both understand what this means for—" My sentence was cut short as I looked down at the slight curve of her baby bump. Even at 2 months, it was visible above her tight yoga pants. The sight of her belly almost made me tear up, but I held back. "For our child," I continued softly, meeting her gaze again. She began to sob more intensely, sinking back into her distress. "Oh, John, I know. I understand what it means more than anyone," she replied, her eyes pleading for me to see her perspective. "More than me?" Her eyes widened, and her crying ceased at my question. I could tell I had shaken her. We sat in tense silence for a while. "I suppose so," I responded sharply. I felt my heart growing colder, preparing for what was ahead. "John, this is the toughest decision I've ever made, but I can't stand by and watch my sister suffer," she said, her anguish and pain evident. I saw she was deeply conflicted, yet she seemed unaware of some crucial aspects. It was as if she couldn't see the full consequences of her choice. "So I have no input in this?" I asked pointedly. I looked into her eyes again, hoping to find something to sway her from her determination. However, her expression hardened, showing stubbornness. "John, it's my body," she responded firmly, staring back at me almost defiantly, as if challenging me to dictate what she could do with herself. Shannon was a feminist, and so was I. We both believed in a woman's right to bodily autonomy. However, this wasn't the issue at hand. In my view, the father of an unborn child in a committed marriage has the right to participate in decisions about family planning. Shannon agreed with this philosophy, but in this situation, her focus on her sister clouded her judgment. I realized there was no way to change her mind, but I made one final attempt. "Shannon, please don't go through with this. There must be another solution," I begged. My pleas were met with a mixture of defiance and sorrow. She was clearly torn, but her decision was resolute. I knew nothing I said would alter her stance. "I'm sorry, John. I have to do this," she replied, her eyes swollen from crying. She was silently seeking my approval, which I wasn't willing to give. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, each waiting for the other to give in. My heart felt like it was shutting down as time dragged on. It seemed like my life was unraveling. After what was probably 10 minutes, I simply stood up and left the house. I couldn't stay near her anymore. As I walked towards our SUV, I heard her crying and calling my name, but I didn't look back. Through the window, I saw her sad eyes watching me drive away. Once again, I had no idea where I was headed. For the next few hours, my phone was flooded with texts and calls from Shannon. I also received one from her mother. Perfect, I thought. Now she's got her mom on my case. How typical. I ignored every call and text message, unable to face speaking to any of them anymore. It was too painful to realize that they all seemed to believe Ashley was more important than our baby, and expected me to accept having no input in the decision. Finally, I arrived home around midnight, hoping Shannon had gone to bed again. But that wasn't the case. She was waiting for me in the darkened living room, engrossed in a book. When she looked up, her face was filled with worry and distress. I walked past her and headed to the bedroom, undressing as I moved down the hallway. She followed silently, clearly hoping for a chance to talk to me once more. When she spoke, I barely caught her words as I put on my pajama pants. "Are you all right?" "Yeah, never been better," I replied bitterly. I pulled back the sheets and slid into bed. "Let's get some sleep," I said firmly. She could tell I wasn't in the mood to talk and quietly joined me in bed. I turned off the lamp and drifted into a restless sleep. I felt her next to me, and at one point she tried to cuddle. My coldness was obvious, and she withdrew after a few minutes. On Sunday, I spent the day doing household chores while ignoring Shannon. I could see she was hurt by my indifference, but I didn't care. I went about my day like a robot. When she made us lunch, I politely declined since I still had no appetite. The next few days went by in the same manner, wearing us both down. I knew something had to change eventually, but I had no intention of initiating it. I was aware of what was coming for us. Shannon was especially upset before bed on Tuesday, so I knew Wednesday would be the day. On Wednesday morning, I woke up to see her softly crying over her coffee. I poured myself a cup and continued to ignore her. A knock on the door came too soon, snapping us both out of our daze. Shannon opened the door and spoke quietly with her mother, mentioning my name several times. Then, she suddenly stood before me, pleading for me to engage with her, to give her something. I looked into her eyes, silently conveying my own pain once again. Then she walked away towards the door. I watched her leave, wishing she would stop, but she didn't. "Please don't do this, Shannon." I wasn't too proud to beg her to stop, to listen to me, to understand. This was our last chance. She turned to me sadly for a few moments, shook her head, and left our front door with her mother. I watched the door close on our future, knowing our marriage couldn't survive this. We were doomed the moment she left. I cried hard for a long time, sitting dejectedly at our kitchen table, reflecting on our entire relationship and how we had reached this point. It hurt more than anything I had ever felt. I remained there when she returned 2 hours later. Her mother had just dropped her off. Shannon didn't even enter the house with her. I wasn't sure why. Maybe she didn't want to face me, but I also didn't understand why her mother didn't help her inside. I knew the process and saw that Shannon was physically struggling. I couldn't bring myself to look at her, but I realized I would eventually need to overcome my anger and help her. She needed someone, and despite my feelings and what she had just done, I couldn't abandon her in this state. Shannon went to our bedroom, and for the next 2 hours, I listened to her muffled sobs as she lay alone on the bed. I was lost in my thoughts and grief. Was this grief? Was I already mourning our child? I doubted it had fully set in yet. I wondered if Shannon was grieving the same thing. Logic and sympathy overcame my pride, and I went to check on her. "What can I get for you at the store?" I asked gently. "Have you taken the next few days off work?" She didn't respond immediately, continuing to cry softly into the pillow. Eventually, she turned to me with tear-filled eyes and opened her arms. She was asking for comfort. Despite my anger, I still loved her more than anything and couldn't help but embrace her. I embraced her as she wept on my shoulder for the following hour, until she finally dozed off, drained by the emotional toll. She slept well into the night, and when she woke up, I was prepared to go to bed. "I need some rest," I stated plainly as she stirred, rubbing her eyes. She agreed and looked back at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. We briefly discussed what she would require over the next few days, but that was the extent of our conversation. I wasn't willing to delve into the emotional issues that had arisen between us, knowing it would only bring pain and sorrow. Fortunately, she seemed to understand and avoided the topic as well. I suspect she was yearning for my empathy and support, but I simply couldn't provide it. We fell asleep once more, and although she nestled close to me and I allowed the intimacy, we felt more distant than ever. She had taken something from our relationship and given it to someone else. I realized I would never overcome this, and that understanding devastated me. The following 2 weeks passed with little happening. We grew accustomed to our uneasy situation, if that's even possible. Our relationship felt more like that of roommates than husband and wife. I attended to her physical needs, we prepared and usually ate dinner together, and our conversations centered around finances and household matters. The only real difference was that we shared a bed. There was almost no intimacy between us. Shannon would occasionally try to hug me, and while I didn't refuse, my responses were lacking in emotion. She noticed this, and the hugs became less frequent each day. We stopped kissing, which was painful, but I couldn't bring myself to initiate it. There was certainly no intimacy contact. It seemed like it would never happen again, probably because deep down I knew our relationship was over. What was the point otherwise? One bleak Sunday afternoon, Shannon came back from a doctor's appointment regarding her mother. Once again, her dear mother had arranged everything and dropped Shannon off without visiting our home. Honestly, I was relieved. I had no desire to deal with my mother-in-law right now. "I'm going to have the procedure done this Wednesday," I heard her say softly from behind me while I was putting away dishes in the kitchen. "Right, the transplant surgery. I should have expected it to happen soon. This likely meant she would need a ride to the hospital and that I would probably have to stay for the duration. I assumed she would also spend a day being monitored there. Could you give me a ride and stay until it's finished?" she asked hesitantly, wringing her hands. I looked at her and realized I would do whatever was necessary to help her through this. Over the past 2 weeks, I had done a lot of thinking, and although I still felt betrayed, I knew I couldn't abandon her now. I would support her through the surgery and the recovery period to ensure she was okay. "You can count on me to drive you and stay with you," I replied, emotions threatening to make my eyes water, but I struggled to remain composed. However, her eyes immediately filled with tears, and she threw herself into my arms, pressing her body against mine. "Thank you," she whispered tearfully, and I even detected a hint of happiness in her voice. She probably believed this was a step toward healing and forgiveness on my part, but I knew better. Still, I chose not to spoil the moment, understanding she needed to stay positive for her upcoming surgery. We could address our marriage once she had recovered. The procedure went smoothly, and she recovered fairly quickly. I saw her parents a few times during the 2 days we spent in the hospital, but we didn't speak. The silent tension was enough for us to understand that we weren't on speaking terms at the moment. I even saw Ashley when she was being wheeled down for a meeting with Shannon before the surgery. I kept myself distant. "She should be back to 100% in about 4 weeks, the overly enthusiastic doctor told me before taking her to the operating room. "You'll have your wife back in no time." My lack of response and expression must have said it all, as his face shifted from excitement to confusion, and he hurried away after awkwardly shaking my hand. Shannon was heavily sedated and exhausted, and by the time we got home, she was practically asleep. I tucked her into bed and began tidying up the house. I had plenty of time to think over the next couple of weeks. Shannon spent most of her time in bed and on the phone with her mom, leaving me alone with my thoughts. It took me about 2 weeks to sort everything out, and by the end, I knew 2 things for certain. First, I would always love Shannon. Nothing would change that, not this situation, nor anything else in life. She could literally stab me, and I would still love her. Second, I could no longer be her husband. The second loss was, without a doubt, more painful than I can express. I made every attempt to overcome it, genuinely giving my all to move forward, but it simply wasn't possible. I held too much resentment for what she had done to us and the way she did it. I had to say goodbye to my unborn child without any choice in the matter, no voice, no consideration, just a notification that it was final. You might ask how I can still love her without remaining her husband. It's actually quite simple. Loving someone doesn't mean you have to be married to them. I've loved many people who have wronged me, and although I distanced myself, that love remained. Shannon was just the latest addition to that list. Shannon sacrificed our future to save her sister. I understood that family bonds are strong and that her love for her sister motivated her actions. However, that doesn't make it right in my eyes. There was a significant chance we might never be able to conceive again, and even if we did, the strain from this loss would likely ruin our marriage further. Things would never be the same. In the end, I realized I couldn't move past it, and it wouldn't be fair to stay in a marriage where a toxic element was eroding our love from within. I decided to stay by her side during the final weeks of her recovery, and once she was self-sufficient, I planned to share my decision with her. One evening, I came home from work to find Shannon nearly hysterical, crying while talking on the phone. When she saw me enter, she quickly ended the call and turned her attention to me. "The transplant was a success. She's going to be okay," she exclaimed with joyful, relieved tears. I felt a moment of happiness for her and her sister, truly relieved that things had worked out for Ashley. She would live a full life, not cut short by tragedy. It was a happy moment. We hugged, and she cried more. I smiled at Shannon and told her I was glad to hear the news, and I genuinely meant it. Unfortunately, that happiness was short-lived, as the pain of our loss returned like a sharp knife in my heart. Shannon couldn't contain her joy that day, and although it hurt me, I tried not to dampen her spirits. Over the next week, I met with a lawyer recommended by a close friend to discuss dividing our assets and figuring out our next steps. I decided to file for divorce immediately instead of just separating to avoid a longer and more painful process. I needed to rip the Band-Aid off and move on. Shannon earned slightly more than I did in my job, and I had no intention of taking anything from her. I had our lawyer draft an agreement that allowed her to retain everything that was hers, along with all our investments and savings. My plan was to leave with only my income, as that was truly all I needed. At the same time, I had been searching for apartments and found a couple of affordable, decent options in town. By the time she recovered, I would essentially be ready to move out. Shannon noticed my gloomy demeanor several times and asked me to talk, but I declined each time politely. I didn't want to upset her while she was still in pain and unable to take care of herself. I didn't want to hurt her at all, but I knew it was unavoidable. One evening after dinner, she confronted me. "John, we need to discuss all of this. Everything that's happened," she said urgently, her eyes imploring me. "It's overshadowing us like a dark cloud, and I don't know what to do." I could see she was anxious, and it broke my heart knowing that leaving would hurt her even more. But I also knew I couldn't stay, as this was how things would continue between us, a constant shadow hanging over us. She would heal in time and find someone else to love and cherish her. It just couldn't be me anymore. "What exactly do you want to talk about?" I asked. "Everything, I suppose," she stammered. "I want to hear you. I want you to share your feelings. I want you to get angry at me," she cried, tears welling up in her eyes. "Anything but this unbearable silence and tension between us." "It's interesting that you want to know how I feel now, after everything, Shannon," I replied sharply. If she wanted it, she would get it. This took her by surprise, and she was shocked by my harsh words. But I think she realized they were the truth. She had never listened to me when it mattered most. "I guess from my point of view, it doesn't matter how I feel anymore," I continued, "because it certainly didn't matter how I felt when you made this decision without me." My words struck her like a slap, and she staggered. Her eyes filled with tears, and I genuinely believe that for the first time since I devised this plan, she understood the impact of excluding me from her decision. Now she would comprehend the consequences of her actions. "Oh my God," she sobbed between words. "What have I done?" Heavy sobs racked her body as she stood in the middle of the kitchen. She was feeling everything now. I think she realized that the damage was done and it would be almost impossible to fix. She could also see the grief and sadness on my face as I stood there. "I need to leave," I said softly, while she continued to cry. I told Jeff I'd help him finish his patio tonight. Jeff was my boss and the creator of the fantasy sports website I handled statistics for. I had been giving him tips on DIY renovations for his property. Shannon looked at me through her tears, nodded quietly, and turned to walk dejectedly to the bedroom. I knew I needed to end this soon because the pain would eventually destroy us both. I would wait out the week and then sit her down to explain everything. It would be the toughest thing I ever did, but God willing, I would do it. When I returned 3 hours later, I saw my mother-in-law's car parked in our driveway, and I knew things were about to get difficult. The house was quiet when I entered, which wasn't what I expected. But then I heard their voices outside, realizing they were on the deck. I had no desire to speak to either woman, so I tried to quietly make my way to the bedroom. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. I was in my bedroom for a mere 2 minutes when I heard the door creak behind me. Assuming it was Shannon, I spoke without turning around. "I'll be up early tomorrow, and I can take you to your last checkup at 7, I said. "You have a lot of nerve, treating my daughter so harshly when she's going through such a tough time," a nasally voice responded from the door. She had no right to comment, walking into my bedroom, in my house, and passing judgments on matters that didn't concern her. "Get out of my house," I replied, keeping my voice steady but leaving no doubt about my sincerity. I don't believe she fully understood the danger she was in, as I think she had no clue that I was aware of how deeply she was involved in ruining my life and my marriage. If I were ever close to harming a woman physically, it would be at this very moment with my mother-in-law. She stubbornly stood in the doorway, likely trying to intimidate me. I chose not to give her the satisfaction of turning around, so I simply repeated my request in the same manner. "Leave my house immediately," I said once more. She must have realized that I wasn't going to engage with her and that she had no leverage, so she turned on her heel and walked downstairs. About 20 minutes later, she was gone, and Shannon was sitting alone on the couch. "I guess you thought you could have your mother pressure me into talking to you, huh?" I asked, startling her from her thoughts. She looked at me with tears on her cheeks and swollen eyes. She must have cried a lot. I bet her mom told her how terrible her husband was. It must have been hard for her to accept. Her silence confirmed that I was right. I wonder how submissive her father must be for these women to believe I would just accept this situation. I also bet her mom convinced her that my opinion didn't matter in these matters. After all, it was her body. I wondered if she still believed that. The rest of the evening passed with little to no conversation, and we went to bed with a constant dark cloud hanging over us. The tension was thick, but no one said a word. The doctor informed us exactly what I had anticipated, that she was fit to resume work and her regular activities. Good, I thought. Now it's time for me to move on from this chaos and attempt to reconstruct my life. I spoke with Jeff and requested the remaining days of the week off. I realized I needed time to organize my personal matters, which wouldn't have been possible while working. "Is everything all right, John?" he inquired with a worried expression. "No, Jeff. Things are actually quite tough at home," I responded, my voice tinged with a sadness that surprised me. I had only discussed this issue with Shannon and had scarcely spoken to her as well. I was on the verge of tears and didn't mind. Jeff was a considerate person who could tell I was struggling. "Take all the time you need, John," he said kindly. "Return when you've sorted everything out." "Thanks, Jeff," I replied, thankful to have such a supportive boss. but I will be back to work on Monday. This week, Shannon was working half days, so she was already home by the time I arrived early in the afternoon. I had spent the morning with my lawyer, who had provided me with the final version of the divorce papers. She began speaking before I even had a chance to take off my jacket. Ashley has recovered from the surgery and will be discharged from the hospital today, she said hopefully. I assume she wanted me to feel happy for them or something, and honestly, I was, but I just couldn't stand that their happiness seemed to come at the cost of my own. Well, it sounds like everything worked out for you both, I said, my voice carrying a hint of bitterness. She recoiled at my response, clearly hurt by my coldness. I think she was genuinely taken aback by my reaction to the situation. I didn't intend to hurt Shannon. There was already enough pain for all of us to bear, and at this point, what was done was done. No amount of guilt-tripping or blaming would change anything. But sometimes, my immediate reaction was to lash out when she pushed my buttons like this. I sat down across from her and looked at her for a long time, contemplating what our lives would be like a week from now, a month, a year. Everything seemed bleak, and it made me very sad. After what felt like hours, I finally broke the silence with words I never thought I'd say to Shannon. "I'm going to be leaving you soon," I said, my voice so soft I wasn't even sure I had said it. Shannon looked confused, trying to grasp what I meant. "Are you going out again tonight?" she asked. "No, Shannon," I said firmly. "What I'm saying is that I've filed for divorce, and I'm going to move out." My words lingered in the air for a few moments before Shannon's face fell, and she was overcome with anguish as she fully understood. "No!" she started crying softly, breaking my heart once more. "This can't be happening," she cried, burying her face in her hands. I remained seated, watching Shannon sob into her hands, her body trembling with heavy breaths. I desperately wanted to comfort her, but I couldn't bring myself to. We were too distant now. It would only complicate things further down the line. After a few minutes, she lifted her tear-swollen eyes to look at me. "How can you leave me after 6 years of marriage and everything we've been through?" she begged. "You're just going to throw it all away?" "One day, maybe after you've had some therapy, you'll understand that it wasn't me who ruined our marriage, Shannon," I replied calmly, my voice filled with genuine empathy. Seeing the woman I loved in such pain tore my heart apart. I knew it was my decision to leave, but as I mentioned before, I truly believed it was the only way. "We can work through this, John," she cried out, desperately asking me to reconsider. "I'm so sorry, John. Please, please, give me a chance to fix this." "How do you plan to fix this, Shannon?" I responded, growing angry at her unrealistic expectations. "Are you going to find a fucking time machine and go back and not abort our baby?" I shouted, losing my composure. "Or at the very least, ask for my opinion before tearing my heart out of my chest." I was furious now, all the built-up resentment breaking through my usually calm demeanor. Shannon was hysterical, but I couldn't suppress my emotions any longer. "Because I might have been able to live with it if you had just respected me enough to ask me, to make me feel like I had a say in this," I said. "But unfortunately, it seems your mom had more of a say in this than I did, and because of that, I cannot stay married to you." I paused, giving her a moment to process my words. Steadying my nerves, I continued. "I'm going to make this straightforward for all of us by leaving," I said calmly. "None of you will have to see me or feel uncomfortable anymore." "John, please, tell me this isn't happening," she pleaded, likely hoping it was just a nightmare she'd soon wake from. She was now kneeling before me, holding my hands tightly. "It's over, Shannon," I declared, determined to bring this to an end. "There's nothing left for me here," I added, tears streaming down my face. I reached behind me, pulled out the manila envelope, and placed it on the table beside her. "Review them, consult a lawyer if you need to, but I'm confident you'll find them fair," I said as she began crying again. "Please don't contest the divorce. Let's just finalize it, I whispered. Respect my wish to move on with my life. With that, I withdrew my hands from hers and stood up, leaving her gasping on the floor. I felt the urge to comfort her once more, but I resisted. I have an apartment downtown. I'll text you when I'm coming to collect my things, I said as I approached the door. She didn't respond. I'll leave everything for you, taking only what I need to survive and some items from the shed. I'll come back for anything else later. I left her in the living room, still on the floor, and closed the door on the past 6 years of my life. 6 years I could never get back. 6 years that felt entirely wasted. I had poured my soul into this marriage, this house, this life, and I didn't even realize that I was leaving all of that behind. Shannon resisted the divorce fiercely. She did everything she could not only to oppose it, but also to persuade me to reconcile. I expected this because I knew her well and understood that she wouldn't simply give up just because I requested her to. Most likely, she had sought advice from her wise mother, and I'd wager my salary that her mom encouraged her to fight the divorce. She probably was told that I would eventually return to her. For reasons I couldn't understand, Shannon always seemed to trust her mother implicitly. She believed whatever nonsense came from her mother's mouth, which was truly heartbreaking. I hoped that, for her own good, she would one day sever that influence and become independent. Over the past 2 weeks, Shannon and her parents had been bombarding my phone with calls. I averaged around 20 missed calls each day. I responded to Shannon's texts only if they were urgent. Neither of them knew my current address since I omitted that information, and I was grateful for that. My lawyer informed me that Shannon had indeed hired her own attorney. However, it was solely to notify me that she wouldn't sign the divorce papers unless I agreed to meet her in person. I thought, if it would get her to sign the papers, why not? A month and a half after I provided her with the divorce documents, we arranged to meet and discuss the matter. We decided to meet at my lawyer's office, keeping it just between the two of us, without any legal representatives present. When I arrived, Shannon was already there. I have to admit, when I first saw her, I barely recognized her. She had lost at least 10 pounds and appeared defeated. She was wearing baggy jeans and a hoodie, which was very unlike her usual style. Her eyes followed me as I approached a chair opposite her. There was a profound sadness in her gaze, highlighting the seriousness of our situation. I sat down, and we stared at each other in silence for several minutes. She attempted to speak a few times, but held back each time. Eventually, she spoke in a rough voice. I've practiced what I want to say to you countless times in my head, but there are so many things I don't know where to start, she said, laughing bitterly, seemingly at herself. I waited for her to continue since she was the one who initiated the conversation. The first thing I want to say is that I'm sorry, she began. Sorry for disrespecting you, for keeping you in the dark, for hurting you deeply, and most of all, for ruining a perfectly happy marriage, she added, with years of sorrow evident in her eyes. Tears welled up in my eyes as she spoke, bringing back all the pain of the past few months in waves. I want you to know that I'm not here to make excuses, she continued. But I now realize that I failed you. I failed us. I prioritized others over you, let my emotions cloud my judgment, and allowed other people to influence me, she admitted, as if going through a mental checklist. Clearly, she had rehearsed this several times. I told myself many times that I wouldn't beg for a second chance. But now that I'm here and looking at you, I have to try, she said earnestly. John, if you would just give me a chance, I would spend the rest of my life making it up to you, reminding you why you fell in love with me, she pleaded. I want us to attend counseling and find a way to overcome this together. I remained silent, reflecting on her words. On one hand, a part of me wanted to give her a chance, to give us a chance. She was right. I did love her, and that probably would never change. But another part of me knew it wouldn't work, and counseling would likely turn into a series of long, emotional sessions. I could never move past what had happened, and it wouldn't be fair to subject her to that. Shannon had made an impossible decision, but unfortunately, that decision wasn't about me or our marriage. "Please, John, I'll do anything," she begged. "Anything." "To be honest, Shannon, I don't see how it could help," I responded sadly. "The damage is already done, and neither you nor I can undo it. Ever." I emphasized my words for effect. Tears filled her eyes at my harsh response, and she lowered her head. "I know what I've done, and I'm so sorry," she wept. "It will never be the way it was, but maybe one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me." She paused briefly. "I can't imagine life without you, John." Her words brought tears to my eyes, but also reminded me of the reality of the situation. I couldn't forgive her. She had made a conscious choice to ignore my feelings and ended our pregnancy, knowing how important it was to both of us. "I'm sorry you had to make the decision you did, and I truly empathize with what you were feeling, but you chose a future that didn't include me," I told her. Sometimes in life, we have to make impossible decisions, and sometimes the outcome isn't what we hoped for. A few minutes of silence settled between us as Shannon quietly cried, absorbing my words without replying. I guess she felt the need to listen to me, especially since this was the most we had talked since I handed her the divorce papers. "I'm so angry with you," I began, gazing deeply into her eyes. "I'm upset that you chose your sister over our future, and I truly hate that I feel this way. For obvious reasons," I continued. "Because of that, it's not fair for us to stay together, as I would always harbor resentment. And I'm not sure that resentment will ever disappear," I added, my voice breaking with emotion. She cried openly as I expressed my feelings to her. It was heartbreaking to see her so distraught. "Go be with your family, Shannon, and try to find a new direction in life," I said, hoping to conclude the conversation. The more I saw her, the more I missed her and wanted to move past the pain she had caused. "I truly wish you the best and hope you find peace," I said, standing up from my chair. "Please sign the paper so I can also move on and find peace." She kept crying into her hands as I left the room, out of her life. I never glanced back. Shannon signed the papers that week but insisted on giving me a portion of our investments. She didn't think it was fair for her to take everything. I told my lawyer we could settle the remaining matters privately later, but to proceed with filing and finalizing the divorce. A month before the divorce was finalized, Shannon's mother made an appearance. She came to my workplace, somehow bypassed the front desk, and stormed into my office, figuratively speaking. She launched into a rant about how selfish I was and rambling about growing up and being a man about it. I simply looked her in the eye and remained silent until she left. I didn't ultimately relocate when the divorce was finalized. My original plan was to move to a new place to start fresh, but before I could leave, an excellent job opportunity came my way that was simply too good to decline. Life continued as usual, and I kept living in my small one-bedroom apartment, channeling my energy into my work. I was still employed in the sports industry, but the pay had significantly improved. I could have moved to a larger place, but there was no real reason to leave my current apartment. Plus, I had no one to impress, so upgrading wasn't on my mind. I wasn't actively dating. My friend Jeff once set me up on a blind date, and although she seemed like a nice person, I wasn't interested, and the date ended prematurely. I believe she noticed my emotional unavailability and decided to end things before it became awkward. 3 years had passed since my divorce was finalized, and I still missed her. It wasn't as painful as the first terrible year, but she remained in my thoughts. Occasionally, I thought about checking up on her, but I always reminded myself that it wasn't my concern anymore, so I left her be. I lived like this for a while until one day, while running an errand for my boss downtown, I saw her. Actually, I saw both of them. They were approaching me on the sidewalk about 50 feet away. Yes, Shannon appeared to have a new man in her life, It shouldn't have surprised me, but it still did, shaking me to my core. It was clear they were deeply in love, how she held his arm, the way he gazed into her eyes when she smiled at him. But most striking was her visible baby bump. She must have been around 7 months pregnant. She carried herself beautifully and didn't have the typical waddle I imagined most women have that far along. She looked graceful, elegant, and radiant. My heart shattered in an instant upon recognizing her. I knew I shouldn't feel hurt anymore since I was the one who left her. But seeing her pregnant belly still caused me immense pain. It reminded me of what I once had and lost. It also hurt to see how easily she had moved on while it seemed like I never would. I didn't want her to notice me because just seeing her like that was already painful enough. If she looked at me with pity, it would completely break me. I tried to slip into a doorway before she saw me, but coincidentally, she was looking that way when I did, and our eyes met as I reached the step. With nowhere to hide, I decided to keep walking and hoped she wouldn't approach me. She didn't. Why would she? She was with a man. But I received a pitying glance and guilty eyes. I can't even describe the expression she gave me. Whatever it was, it sealed my fate. I should have moved, I thought. This is why I wanted to leave this town. I passed by them without acknowledging, then kept walking and walking, eventually forgetting about the errand I was supposed to run. I reflected on my life repeatedly, trying to pinpoint where I went wrong. What did I do to deserve this? What cruel act had I committed that made karma target me so relentlessly and destroy my life? I walked for so long and so far that when I reached the edge, it caught me off guard. The railing was there to prevent me from falling anyway. I stood at the very edge of the highest point of the second largest bridge connecting the two cities. I was both surprised to find myself there and felt like I might finally achieve the peace I had been seeking. It was peaceful, especially as the sun set on a beautiful day. You might think I would have some final words for the universe before leaving, but I didn't feel the need. Everything had already been said. This was my fate, and I was ready to embrace it. Shannon. My teacup was dangerously balanced on my nearly 8-month pregnant belly. It was somewhat amusing how my eating and drinking habits had changed since the 3rd trimester began. I frequently found myself in awkward and sometimes risky positions, like this one, with a hot cup of tea on me, ready to spill if the baby kicked again. I was lounging in my living room, enjoying a peaceful evening with my boyfriend Tom, when my phone rang. "Hey babe, could you be the best boyfriend ever and hand me my phone?" I asked him with playful sweetness and charm. Tom, the wonderful man he was, went along with whatever I requested these days. He treated me exceptionally well, more than I probably deserved, to be honest. He believed that since I was carrying his baby, it was the least he could do. Tom passed me the phone and removed the precarious teacup so I could concentrate. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number, but since my job often involved calls from unknown numbers, I decided to answer. "Hello," I greeted cheerfully, curious about who might be calling and hoping to brighten their day. There was silence on the other end, and for a moment I thought the call had disconnected. "Hello?" I tried again. Hi Shannon, this is Angela," a quiet voice responded. Angela? Did I know an Angela? Then it clicked. Angela, John's mother. Why was she calling me? "Oh my God! Angela, how are you? It's been such a long time," I exclaimed excitedly. It had been about 3 years since I last heard from John's mom. She had called to arrange picking up some items from the house that John hadn't taken with him. Wedding photos and a few gifts and keepsakes we had gathered over the years. Things he had said he didn't want at the time, but Angela thought he might regret not keeping them later. It hurt me that he wanted nothing from our shared life. I was glad Angela came to collect them for him and hoped he kept at least some. "Yes, it has, hasn't it?" she replied, her voice tinged with deep sadness and some hesitation. Shannon, I'm calling to tell you. She paused again, struggling to find the words. Her silence lasted almost 30 seconds, and I began to worry. What's wrong, Angela? I asked, fearing her next words. I'm calling to tell you that John passed away 2 nights ago, she said solemnly, breaking my heart. Oh God, no, I whispered to whoever was listening. I must have turned very pale, sitting there gripping the phone and hoping desperately that it was all a nightmare. Tom could tell from my expression and tone that something terrible had happened. He looked at me with sympathy, but knew better than to approach. I had seen John just days before, walking downtown. He passed me by indifferently, and although I didn't expect to talk, it hurt that he didn't even acknowledge me. I felt bad that the first time he saw me after our divorce was when I was almost 8 months pregnant. I think we both assumed I wouldn't get pregnant again, given the slim chances. But here I was, defying the odds. I'd be lying if I said the first trimester wasn't very stressful. Accepting that I was pregnant with a child that wasn't John's required many tough sessions with my therapist. Please tell me this isn't real, I begged her. He couldn't have died in the last 2 days since I saw him, could he? What could have happened? It's real, Shannon, and I'm really, really sorry to be the one to tell you, she replied with the kindness I had once deeply appreciated in her. We didn't see his parents often since they lived abroad, but when we did, it was always special to me. I asked her what had happened, but she avoided my questions, offering vague explanations about an accident he had been involved in. It didn't matter, though, because he was gone. That was all that truly registered with me. The main reason I'm calling is that he has named you in his will, and there will be a reading with our lawyer next week, she explained through my quiet sobs. Oh God, I'm included in his will? Why? Additionally, and there's absolutely no pressure or expectation, the funeral is scheduled for tomorrow at 3 p.m. I'll email you the details, and you can decide if you'd like to attend, she continued, once again surprising me with her kindness and thoughtfulness. I wasn't sure if I could handle being there. It would be incredibly painful. I don't pretend to understand what's going on in your life or where you stand, but I know John once meant a lot to you. I believe that people who care about each other should always have the chance to say goodbye when one of them passes on, she said, her voice wavering with emotion. No matter what may have happened. Through my tears and sobs, I managed to thank her. Thank you for telling me, Angela. And yes, he meant a lot to me. He still means a lot to me. I was inconsolable for the rest of the day. Tom didn't ask about it, and I didn't tell him. I had never spoken of John to Tom. I didn't need to. I didn't want to. John was a part of my life that I had tucked away in a dark, hidden place. It was just a memory for me. But things had changed. I was named in his will, and God help me, I felt I needed to attend that funeral. I wasn't sure if it would set me back in therapy, but I believed I needed it. I would have to explain everything to Tom. On the bright side, he handled it well and told me he was there to talk whenever I needed him. The funeral was small, only 12 people attended. I nearly cried when I walked into the modest funeral home and saw just a handful of attendees. How was this possible? John knew so many people. He was someone important. Before I could dwell on it, Angela came over and hugged me. She seemed to understand what I was feeling. Shh. It's okay, sweetie. We decided to keep the gathering limited to those closest to him, she comforted me, making me feel cherished as one of those people. She briefly glanced down at my belly, then met my eyes again with a faint smile. Nodding, she told me she was happy for me and proud of me. I felt almost too numb to cry, but a tear did fall from my eye as she returned to her husband. The service was brief and held a closed casket. I didn't have the courage to ask why. It still didn't seem to matter much, but I was somewhat curious about what had happened. I decided I would find out from his parents after the service. Angela had somehow disappeared as people were leaving, so I approached John's father outside in the parking lot. It was a tearful encounter, and he was as kind to me as Angela had been. "What happened, Pete?" I asked, my voice trembling. He gazed at me for a long time, contemplating his response. Finally, he seemed to make up his mind and continued, "You're going to learn the truth eventually, kid, so I might as well handle the hard part," he said, his voice filled with pain. "John took his own life, Shannon," he told me, looking down at the ground as he saw my face start to break apart. The next thing I remember is waking up on my back with a cold cloth on my forehead. I looked to my left and saw Angela beside me with my boyfriend Tom, speaking in soft tones. I had fainted. That's what they explained. Tom brought me home, and we talked. I told him about John. I told him everything. He listened quietly, and throughout it all, I didn't cry. I was almost emotionless. Number Tom seemed to handle it all gracefully, and with a gentle kindness I hadn't seen before, he tucked me into bed and sang me to sleep. The following days were much the same. I felt numb to everything. Tom kept me going by reminding me to eat, sleep, and attend the will reading. Only 4 individuals attended the reading, excluding the lawyer, myself, John's parents, and his sister April. The lawyer immediately began by listing the items John had bequeathed to his parents, which were primarily keepsakes and sentimental possessions. However, John had also left his father a substantial collection of tools and the garage he had established as a side business, which was actually quite valuable. Next, the lawyer addressed the financial aspects. It turned out that John had amassed a significant amount of money, leaving me astonished. He had set up a trust fund of $250,000 for his sister, along with several investments he had retained from our marriage. Then it was time for the lawyer to disclose what John had left me. As the lawyer read the will, I struggled to believe it. According to the documents, John was leaving me nearly $10 million. I couldn't comprehend where he had accessed such funds. Additionally, he had left me his business and website, giving me the freedom to manage them as I wished. The paperwork indicated that this venture was also quite profitable. In his letter to me, John mentioned that I could sell it for a substantial amount if I chose to do so. "When was this will signed?" I asked in disbelief. How long had he been certain about this decision? "April 19th, 2017, the lawyer replied matter-of-factly. "Is on sibtsilnion." That was shortly after our divorce. Why would he divorce me and then leave everything to me in his will? I was perplexed and overwhelmed. Why would he leave me all that money? I questioned incredulously, unable to grasp the reasoning. "He believes you'll invest it in non-profits," Angela responded, turning to face me. "You've worked for a non-profit for as long as I've known you, and you do valuable work in the city," she continued. "John was confident the money would be in good hands with you." Her words brought me to tears once more, and I realized she was right. That's exactly what John would have wanted. I left the reading in stunned silence, filled with anguish. I feared this pain would never leave me, becoming an inseparable part of who I am, just as John would have wanted. I had moved on in almost every way. I had found a man who wanted to marry me and have children, and I had left my life with John as much as possible. But a part of him would always remain with me. Now, I held knowledge that no one else did. John had taken his own life on the day we passed each other on the street. I can never know what he was thinking or feeling when he saw me, but the fact remains that he ended his life after that encounter. This reality gnawed at my soul. I never shared what I knew or how it affected me with anyone. I concealed it well. It was my burden to bear for what I had done to him all those years ago. What I had done to us. Through therapy, I discovered years ago that the root of my problems wasn't truly me, but my mother. She was a controlling, manipulative, and angry woman who used those closest to her to achieve her own ends. After my divorce, I confronted her and realized she had been a major influence behind my decision to have an abortion. Over time, she subtly hinted and guilt-tripped me, and subconsciously, I went along with her agenda. When John objected to my decision, my mother labeled him as a controlling husband trying to steal my happiness. I believed her. It turned out my younger sister was my mother's favorite, a fact I also uncovered in therapy. My mother manipulated me into giving up my unborn child and my marriage to ensure Ashley's survival. She didn't care about my well-being, only that Ashley remained alive. I was grateful my sister was alive and loved her dearly. Reflecting on my decision, I harbor no regret for her. It's strange, though. When I think of John, all I feel is regret for my choice. How can this emotional contradiction exist? 2 years ago, I completely cut my mother out of my life and hadn't heard from her until about 4 months ago. She learned through the grapevine that I was pregnant and called me, acting cheerful and pretending everything was fine. She inquired about the due date so she could fly out and be present for the birth. Ha! Without hesitation, I told her to go to hell and hung up. She would never meet my child, neither in this life nor the next. She didn't deserve me or a grandchild. I was given a second chance at life. It wasn't the second chance I had envisioned, but it was sufficient. I would never have the life I was supposed to have, and I had to accept that. I would raise my children and strive to be a better mother to them than my own mother had been. That was my purpose. Over the next year, I liquidated all of John's assets and gradually distributed the wealth to several reputable organizations in the city. That year, I received numerous tearful thank yous. If I recall correctly, the total amounted to approximately $18 million. John had made a significant impact on my life and the world. He was no longer here, and I would always miss him. But I used my time with John as motivation to improve myself and make the world a better place. Perhaps one day, I will look in the mirror and feel that I have honored his memory.